this computer. There we go. Now you may begin.
Good evening, everyone. This is Scott Jacobson, and I am the proud interim director of HEAL International. And in case you don't know, HEAL is an amazing organization that actually prepares young people to deal with epidemics and pandemics. Everything that we're going through is exactly what HEAL is all about. And this town hall is important because we need to have ways to communicate with our communities about the vaccinations and the lack of vaccinations. We're very lucky to be here in Arizona where it's now raining, but where a high rate of people are unvaccinated. And so we are all struggling with the same thing. And I think as community members, we all need to sort of figure out what we can do as individuals to encourage people who are not getting vaccinated to be vaccinated. So we have Dr. Bert Jacobs, our co-founder, HEAL's co-founder, and amazing man and virologist and expert in vaccinations at ASU Biodesign Institute, and the great Dr. Bob Englund, former head of Maricopa County Health Department and Pima County, and has now finally left a job in the private sector, which didn't appeal to him. So I'm gonna start with Dr. Jake, and then Dr. Bob will come in. Please send us your questions. I have questions already that you have sent in, and we will be sure to get to them. And please, we would like to hear from all of you because we want to know what's going on around the country and what people are seeing. Take it away, Dr. Jake.
My pleasure. Hang on just a second. Let me just share my screen.
For those who don't think it ever rains in Arizona, it is pouring here.
Yeah, Maureen, it's been lovely raining in Arizona as well. You knew that before you left, though. So a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is the Delta variant, and you know, I got to say, I didn't know as much about Delta until I started preparing for this, and what I know scares me. And so that will come across, I believe, in the discussion we have. I think we're in for a tough road ahead coming up. So let me get into Delta. Hang on one second. So most of these different coronaviruses, SARS-CoV-2s, we characterize as alpha, beta, gamma, or delta, and we do that primarily based on the sequence of one of the key proteins, the spike protein, S protein. And the spike protein is the protein that when we get infected with SARS-CoV-2, we make good antibodies against spike, we make good immune responses against spike, and the vaccines contain either RNA or DNA that codes for spike protein so that we get an immune response to the spike protein. And Delta is unique amongst the coronaviruses. This is the looking at the sequence of the spike protein. And what the two, for now, the main thing you have to realize is each one of these little squares is a mutation that's present in Delta that was not present in the original Wuhan strain of the virus. So Delta is quite mutated compared to the Wuhan strain. And we know what some of these mutations do. This L452 to R mutation is in a region of the protein that is involved with the protein binding to cells in the lung. And this L452 to R mutation makes the virus bind better to cells in the lung. So more efficient at binding to the cells. This P681 to R mutation allows the virus, once it's bound to the cells, to get in more efficiently. And so this is like a 1-2 punch. This virus binds to cells better, and once it's bound to cells, it gets in better. And the consequence of that is that there's 1,000 times more virus in nasal fluid for somebody infected with Delta than with somebody who was infected with the original Wuhan strain of SARS-CoV-2. That's remarkable. When I saw that, I thought somebody made a mistake and put a couple too many zeros in there. But that's what the current data is telling us, that this virus is able to reproduce to 1,000 times higher levels in nasal fluid than the original Wuhan virus. And that has two consequences. First is the virus is much more transmissible. And I'm going to deal with that consequence first. The second is a bit, the first is clear that the virus is more transmissible. I'm going to make some arguments that because it's more transmissible, it may in fact cause more disease. And I'll get to that later. Talk about transmissibility. So we sort of, this is a response that actually will answer somebody's question that was referred to me earlier. So this is a graph showing the deadliness of viruses on the vertical axis versus transmissibility of viruses on the horizontal axis. And so you have something like measles out here that's incredibly transmissible, relatively low deadliness. You have viruses up here like rabies and Ebola, which are highly pathogenic, but relatively low transmissibility. And original Wuhan strain, SARS-CoV-2 is right down here. And the way we look at transmissibility or contagiousness is with the R0 or R0. I'll explain what that is in just a minute. And, you know, the original Wuhan strain had an R0 of 2 to 3, something like that. We estimate that the Delta strain has an R0 or an R0 of 6. And you look and say, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Well, first of all, you go from something that's quite contagious to something that's really very contagious in the class of some of our most lethal and contagious diseases: smallpox, polio, tuberculosis. And
that's as of today, yeah. Dr. Jake?
These are sort of average numbers. What I've heard about the R0 for Delta virus is that it's a 6. It's about that. I'm not going to say that's exactly what it is. That's the best guess we have right now.
But for like the other, like TB and Ebola and all of that, those are like what that would be as of like modern day today.
Yeah. So again, this should be untreated TB.
Great.
Treated TB would be way down here. Again, for HIV, we have untreated TB up here, and then treated TB down, or I'm sorry, untreated HIV up here, and then treated HIV down here. And so for tuberculosis, certainly treatment can bring the mortality way down. Okay, so let me go through what the difference between an R0 of 3 and an R0 of 6 is. What an R0 tells you is the average number of people that are infected by a single infected individual. So let's look at an R0 of 3 down here. We've got this one little guy who's infected with SARS-CoV-2. On average, they transmit the virus to 3 people. That's because the R naught is 3. And on average, these 3 people transmit the virus, each of them to 3 new people. And each of these transmit the virus to 3 new people. That's what an R naught of 3 is. And so by the end, we have 27 people infected. R naught of 6, again, not much different than R naught of 3. The first person on average infects 6 new people. Each one of these people on average infects 6 new people. And each one of these on average infects 6 new people. So after 3 rounds of infection, instead of having 27 infected people, we have 216 infected people. 8 times as many infected people with an R naught of 6 compared to an R naught of 3, with only 3 rounds of infection. And since we believe that the Delta virus has about, I'm going to say it has about the same mortality rate as the original Wuhan strain, about 2%. On average, 4 of these people are going to die. And on average here, less than 1 person's going to die. And so this sort of explains the dramatic difference between an R naught of 3 and an R naught of 6, leading to vastly more infected people. And because of that, what we see is that the Delta variant has virtually completely taken over infections in Arizona. This is data provided by a colleague of mine, Ephraim Lim. He's been sequencing lots of coronaviruses in Arizona. And if you look back on April 19th, virtually most of the virus we had here was the Alpha variant. The green is Delta, no Delta whatsoever. First started picking up a little bit of Delta April 26th. And by today, or August 2nd, virtually all of the virus that you're seeing in Arizona is the Delta variant. This light green is a subvariant of Delta, Delta AY.3, and this gray one is just other viruses that don't fit into any of the known variants. And so this virus has taken over like gangbusters. We've never seen anything like this. And in my opinion, that's because it's present in such high concentration in the nasal mucosa that when people are infected, they are spreading the virus to so many more people that it's just taking over in Arizona. Let me stop here for questions. Any questions on this so far?
So Dr. J,
yeah.
Oh, what about the Delta AY.3? Do we expect that to
I don't
evolve
know. I
and
don't. Yeah.
be like
I mean,
where we're at now?
I mean, sort of the AY.3, started out relatively small in June and has increased, but it hasn't increased quite like we've seen with Delta. I don't know what to expect of Delta AY.3. So if we go back, I'm gonna have to go back quite a bit. Hang on just a second. Here, this mutation here, K470N, that I haven't talked about yet, is detected in some sequences, but not all. That's the mutation that's key for the AY.3, and I'll talk a little bit about what this does in later on. And somebody had their hand raised.
Hand up, I noticed.
Yeah, sorry about that. Who was that?
Dr. Jake, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you were showing the last slide with the R6 and the R3, so are you saying that then the death rate with the Delta is less than the first round?
No, so I assumed here that the death rate was the same, about 2%.
Oh,
I'm going to
okay.
argue that likely we're going to start seeing more deaths. And that's the argument I'm going to start giving in just a few minutes.
Okay, no problem. I'll be quiet and listen.
This is an argument. I think we're starting to see it. Bob, you may want to chime in there. I think we're starting to see more severe cases, especially in younger people than we used to see.
Yeah.
But-
You've probably heard in the media
Yeah.
a lot of talk about the death rate, thankfully not being as bad as in an earlier wave. If you think about it for half a second, the one group that is the most vaccinated are older adults.
Right.
And they're the ones who were dying the most all along. So you have a much smaller pool of older adults getting infected now than you do, or at least getting infected without any antibody already on board from the vaccine. A much smaller proportion of the folks who are getting infected. So the numbers of deaths may appear to be not increasing so much, but if you look at younger age groups, you got way more kids getting hospitalized now than you did before. And that's the group, at least the under 12s, who can't get vaccine yet. So I think I saw something that about a fourth of all of our current initial hospitalizations are happening in people under the age of 20,
Yep.
which is way different than we saw.
Way different. Yep. So yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I didn't have anything else.
Okay, so I argue that in addition to being much more transmissible, again, because the average infected person is spewing out so much virus, when new people get infected, they're likely becoming infected with more virus. And what we know is that infection with more virus usually leads to more severe disease. And so this is sort of my explanation for that. So again, a horizontal axis, we're looking at the amount of virus that a person is infected with. So, you know, so this is the average person. They get infected with an average amount of virus. There's some people who get infected with much less virus, and some people that get infected with much more virus. And we know that it's primarily, not completely, but primarily the people who get infected with a lot of virus who tend to come down with symptoms. And the people who are infected with the most virus tend to be the people who end up severely ill in respirators. That's not completely true. You know, clearly obesity and all the other things we've heard about has an effect on this, but to at least some extent. I'm not. There are people in the waiting room. Could somebody let them in? I'm not able to do that. But to a large extent, people infected with more virus tend to get more disease. Sherelle, you had a question? No?
Oh.
No?
I think
Okay.
that was from before.
Okay, it's from before.
Perfect.
So let's just say this was with the original Wuhan strain of the virus. Now with the Delta strain, people are getting infected with more virus because the initial infected people have more virus in their nasal passages. So the average person that gets infected is getting infected with more virus. And so what that means is that the percentage of people who are getting infected with enough virus to make them sick is now greater. And the percentage of people infected with enough virus to put them in the hospital is greater as well. And so I think that, so even if the virus itself is not more pathogenic, just from the fact that that there's more virus present, you're going to get more people sick and more people sicker. Now, there's no real data to show that. This is an argument I'm making from what I know about how viruses work. So these are the first two consequences of the mutations. The third consequence of the mutations in the Delta variant are partial escape from the current vaccines. And so we talked about these two mutations, L52 to R, P681 to R. Many of these other mutations, including this K417N, are what we call immune escape mutations. So the vaccine we get has spike protein from the original Wuhan strain. And so we make antibodies to that spike protein, and most of those antibodies bind to the receptor binding domain, or this, what we call N-terminal antigenic site. And Delta has mutations here so that some of the antibodies we make to the original Wuhan strain can no longer neutralize this virus. Many of the antibodies we make can still neutralize just well, but some of them just don't work anymore. And so I wanted to switch gear now, and I'll get back to some of the consequences of this, but I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the vaccines and what they are, how they work, how well they work, and what side effects we get from them. So, and again, we have a new person in the waiting room. Can somebody let them in? So, in order to talk about vaccines, I've got to talk about information flow in our bodies and cells in our bodies. Within every cell in our body, we have a DNA, which is really the master blueprint. It's just this huge document that tells every cell in our body, has the information to make anything that we need to inside the cell in the body. So thousands of pages long. If a cell wants to make something, what it does is actually make working copies from one page of the master blueprint and uses these working copies to make whatever needs to be made. And these working copies are made out of RNA. And one thing we have to recognize is RNA as a working copy is designed not to stay around very long. RNA is very fragile. You'll look at it and it falls apart. DNA is just the opposite. We want our DNA to stay just about the same for a really long time. RNA is not that. It's a working copy. Once it gets done making what it's supposed to get done, it gets torn up and thrown away. And what the RNA codes for are, hang on just a second. Why am I not going anywhere? Oh, proteins. And proteins are what our body's immune system, when we get infected by a virus, it's proteins that our body makes antibodies to, and our body makes cells that can destroy a virus-infected cells. And so this is what we really want to use to make vaccines. Turns out that proteins by themselves don't work very well as vaccines. RNA works better. DNA works somewhat, but RNA is what has turned out to work best. And so really, two of the arguably the best vaccines we have now for the COVID are made out of RNA. And so again, a couple of things. RNA is designed not to last long, so you get the shot, it works, and then the RNA that was put in with the vaccine gets destroyed. And we already have thousands of RNAs in every cell in our bodies, And what we're doing here is adding one more RNA to the mix. Okay. And so these are, of course, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. There are RNA that are packaged in a package of lipids or fats, and partly that's there to protect the RNA, because I told you it falls apart really easily. And because the RNA falls apart really easily, oh, hang on just a second, we have very stringent storage requirements. You have to ship, at really cold temperatures, store at cold temperatures, because the RNA falls apart so easily that you have to store at these really cold temperatures. And that, not every place in the world has -80-degree freezers. And this is what it comes down to. And so, this is a vaccine that works best in really developed countries. Let's see, I'm not moving anywhere again.
So Dr. Jake, is this not, these vaccines that aren't being distributed widely to undeveloped countries like Africa?
Yeah, you're not, the vaccines that are going to developed countries are more likely AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. These take a virus, a DNA virus that's really innocuous, adenovirus, and they even make it more innocuous. They really basically gut the virus so that it can't replicate. But the virus contains DNA that has the information for making the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. When the virus infects cells, the DNA is read to make RNA, which then is used to make protein. And that's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Add 26, you don't really need to know about that. AstraZeneca is it's a chimp adenovirus. If anybody has questions, I can answer why later on. It's not yet licensed in the US. And the advantage of these adenovirus-based vaccines is they ship easily. You can store them in a standard refrigerator. And so these are much more likely to be used in many parts of the developing world that don't have a really good cold chain. And so you're seeing AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson being used at least somewhat in Africa.
Dr. Jake,
Yep.
Are those single shot?
So the Johnson & Johnson is a single shot. I don't remember whether AstraZeneca was a single shot or a double shot. I just don't remember that. Bob, do you know?
I don't remember either, because
Yeah,
we're
I
not
don't
using
remember.
it.
Yeah, Johnson & Johnson right now is a single shot. So let's look at how effective this works. So these are results of the trial. And let's look at the Pfizer. I like the Pfizer. It's really remarkable. So what you do is you take, what is it? I think you take 30,000, 40,000 people or something like that.
That was the initial for both of them combined, I think.
Okay, so
Yeah.
something like, yeah, for both of them. And you split them in half. And half the people get a placebo. They get a shot that doesn't contain the vaccine. Half the people get the vaccine. People giving the shot don't know who got the vaccine, who got the placebo. The people getting the shot don't know who got the vaccine, who got the placebo. And these people go out and live their lives, is basically what happens. And if you look at the first 7 to 10 days, you see the same rate. And so we're looking at new infections with SARS-CoV-2 on the vertical axis versus days after the first dose, the horizontal axis. First 7 days, nothing happens. First 10 days, nothing happens. And then the people who got the vaccine stop getting infected, literally stop getting infected, whereas the placebo group just keeps going up and up and up.
Wow.
This is a wow. This is called a Kaplan-Meier plot. I've only seen one other Kaplan-Meier plot that looks like this. This is 95% effectiveness, just remarkable. And this is Pfizer, this is Moderna, and look at the Moderna, nothing, flat line after about 10 days. And again, that's because it takes 7 to 10 days for an immune response to happen. So incredible vaccines. I'm jealous. I'm a vaccinologist. I make vaccines. I wish I would have thought about this damn stuff. They're remarkable. They're remarkable. This Johnson & Johnson, same kind of experiment, not experiment, same kind of trial, and single dose. So here for the Pfizer, people got a booster. I don't remember when the boost is for Pfizer. Is it maybe 30 days or 3 weeks? I'm not sure. Somewhere around in here.
Yeah.
Somewhere around here. Johnson & Johnson, these people didn't get a booster, single shot, still quite effective. There were 117 cases in the vaccine arm versus 351 cases in the placebo arm. Not nearly as effective as the Pfizer, 8 versus 162, but still reasonably effective. And all the vaccines protect really well against serious infections. And so,
including the Delta variant.
We'll get to Delta.
Okay.
We'll get to Delta. This is all, this all was going on probably this time of year last year were these when these studies were done. So no, Delta did not exist. This is all with early variants. We'll get to Delta. And so these vaccines work really well. How safe are they? So this is just the adverse events. The vast majority of adverse events are things like muscle pain, fatigue, headache, injection site pain, and they go away within a day or two. Moderna gives a little bit higher side effects than Pfizer. That's actually designed into the two vaccines. J&J is probably better. Very little joint pain and chills. There are rare, serious complications to the vaccines. Johnson & Johnson vaccine is rarely associated with blood clots. Happens about 1 in 300,000 vaccinees, and there are about 1 in 3 million deaths. Due to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Bob, why don't we switch over here?
Okay.
Because you've got the statistics on that.
Okay.
Can I ask one really quick question
Sure.
for both of you guys? So when you said 7 to 10 days for an immune response for the vaccine to take effect, is that after each shot, the one that has the 2 shots, or is someone fully protected after the first vaccine? Because there's all the people are saying, well, there's breakthrough cases, and then the argument is that because they may not be fully vaccinated yet.
I'll talk about waning immunity later.
Okay. All right, great.
All right. So here you go, Bob.
Okay. So looking at the J&J vaccine and comparing the number of cases, if you give 1 million doses of vaccine, this is the data that was presented to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices back when they put that pause on the J&J vaccine, if you remember. And they looked at the number of cases of thrombocytopenic thrombotic syndrome, that's what TTS stands for, those weird blood clots, and compared it to the benefit that we were all getting from the vaccine. So per every 1 million doses for young men, which were the higher risk than older men, you get 2 cases of this weird blood clot, but the vaccine at that point in time, with the rate of transmission that was occurring then, was preventing about 11 deaths for every 1 million doses and keeping, as you see, 600 folks out of the hospital, even more disproportionately beneficial for older folks. Go one more slide. Now, looking at females, The one group that you heard about was younger women were more often affected by this weird blood clot syndrome from the vaccine. They were finding about 13 cases out of every 1 million doses of vaccine. As Jake noted, few of them died from it, however, and 12 deaths prevented by the vaccine. But again, 600 or so hospitalizations, even in the highest risk group, younger women, as you can see, and overwhelmingly disproportionately beneficial for older folks as well. Do you want to go back to talk about the Pfizer complication, or do you want me to do the same thing?
Why don't I go back and talk about Pfizer, and then we'll go to your last slide?
Yeah.
Okay, good. One other sort of interesting statistic I sort of drew up today. So again, about a 1 in 3 million chance of dying with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That's about the same risk of dying that each one of us has from driving in Phoenix for 1 day. So you're almost at almost as much risk driving to get the vaccine as you are in getting the vaccine. Okay. So Pfizer and Moderna are associated with two more severe side effects. One is severe anaphylactic shock, about 100,000 vaccinations. That turns out to be quite treatable. Antihistamine and epinephrine EpiPens. And at least early on, it turned out that some of the first people who got the severe anaphylactic shock from the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines actually had EpiPens with them and gave themselves the shot, because the severe anaphylactic shock occurs primarily in people who have had anaphylactic shock to other things. So these are people who really have severe immune reactions, severe reactions, are used to it, and so it's quite treatable. The other rare side effect that's come up is myopericarditis, about 1 in 100,000 vaccines. This tends to be greatest in younger men as opposed to Johnson & Johnson, where the clots were greatest in younger women. So why don't we go to your slide now?
Right there,
yeah, here we
right
go.
there. Looking at that same thing, the same idea, per million fully vaccinated folks, per million second doses of vaccine, looking at the number of myocarditis cases, again, younger males were the ones who were most at risk. So this was just looking at males and comparing that number of cases, as you can see, to what that same million doses of vaccine prevented. Most myocarditis is self-limiting. It goes away on its own. People fully recover with no long-term effects. As compared to, I must say, it's looking like nearly a third of folks infected with COVID have some sort of long duration of some symptom. When they look at coding of patients and their diagnostic codes going forward, about a third of folks 6 weeks or more out have some kind of chronic symptom still. And you've heard the news, you know, some of these go on for months and months and months. We have no idea whether it's going to be permanent or not for folks. So overwhelmingly, even in the highest risk group, the risk benefit is way in your favor to get the vaccine compared to avoiding it because of the fear of the uncommon risks.
So any questions on that before we go on? Because, you know, I think, Bob, to me, this is one of the key points that we want to make, is that, you know, vaccines, any treatment, any vaccine is going to have side effects. For these 3 vaccines, the side effects are rare. In some cases, they're treatable. And in all cases, the risk of getting harmed by the vaccine is much, much less than the benefit we get from the vaccine.
And I'd like to throw in, if you remember the point in time when this data was compiled and ACIP was considering these risks, that's the transmission rate, the likelihood of getting exposed was so much less than it is now.
Yeah.
That the risk per million doses of vaccine is going to be about the same. But what you prevent with the vaccine goes up when you're talking about increased transmission rate.
Right. Right.
So it's even more skewed now than it was then.
Questions, comments?
Can I ask a random question, kind
Of
of?
course.
As far as the Johnson & Johnson is the one that had the blood clots, correct?
Right.
Was that associated at all? It just popped to my mind since it is younger women. Birth control came to my mind since birth control can cause clots. Have you heard of that?
Bob, do you know the answer to that? I don't know the answer.
There are, as it popped into a lot of people's mind, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
The birth control pills can be associated with clotting in and of themselves, but it's a really different kind of clotting. This is thrombocytopenic thrombotic syndrome is weird because
it's so weird. Yeah, it's really weird.
Thrombocytes are, I mean, that's what your body uses to clot. And I don't even understand the mechanism of this completely. It's not an unheard of syndrome. It happens rarely on its own or for reasons people don't understand. But in the absence of the substance that you usually use to clot, you're getting clots.
Yeah.
So
bizarre.
It's weird. It looks like it's a different kind of mechanism from what birth control pills inherently carry.
The people who get treated with heparin occasionally get a syndrome that's fairly similar to the clotting syndrome with Johnson & Johnson.
Right. So the really good news about this getting so much attention is that the medical community caught on really quick.
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do, probably all the deaths from that clotting syndrome were associated with women who were treated with heparin.
Right.
Which made it worse.
Yep. Heparin makes it worse.
Weird.
And heparin is the first thing you'd think about to treat people having clotting syndrome.
And so you are much less likely to accidentally be treated initially with heparin now than you were initially.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions on this? All right. Hang on.
Oh, it's sorry, Jake. I think there was one question about the boosters. Would that help with Delta? You may get to that.
I'm going on. That's right where I'm going right now.
All right.
So let's look at what happens when you get a vaccine. And so I have, again, on the vertical axis, what I call immune efficiency, just how well your body can fight the virus versus time. And you start out with essentially no ability to fight the virus. You get the first vaccination, your immune response goes up. And again, it takes maybe 7 to 10 days to you get a decent immune response. What I've put here is what I'm calling the threshold immunity that you have to fight off the original Wuhan strain. And from the data I showed, first shot gives really good protection. So first shot gives immunity above this threshold for like 7 to 10 days. And then the immune response wanes and you get a booster shot. And not only does the immune response go up higher, but it goes up quicker. And so this is sort of where We all were, a week after we got our booster. And since that time, our immune response has been waning and waning and waning. But for most of us, the immune response is probably still above the threshold to protect against the Wuhan strain. But remember, I said some of the antibodies that will recognize the Wuhan strain will not recognize the Delta variant. And so our initial immune response in red is lower, just because it's a slightly different virus. And we know that the first immunization really does not get above the threshold that we have to have in order to protect against the Delta virus. And I also argue that the threshold for the Delta virus is probably higher than the threshold for the Wuhan virus, because there's so much virus that we're coming in contact with that we have to have even a higher immune response to protect against the Delta strain. And again, that wanes, we get boosted, and now finally we're above the threshold, protect us against the Delta strain, but our immunity wanes. And the combination of starting out with a lower immune response and the possibility of a higher threshold for the Delta strain means we become susceptible to being infected with the Delta virus much earlier than we would be susceptible to being infected with the original Wuhan strain. And so what happens when we get infected with the Delta virus? Well, again, our immune response goes really high and it goes up really quickly. And in most cases, that doesn't necessarily prevent us from getting infected with the Delta strain, but it will prevent us from getting severe disease. And so the current vaccines seem to do a reasonable job at protecting against really serious disease. They don't do a good job at protecting against infection. And probably, again, they do a reasonable job of protecting against serious disease because we can mount an immune response pretty rapidly. And in most cases, fight off the Delta infection. Now, same thing would happen if we got a booster shot. And I think everybody has probably read the newspapers today that we're likely to be getting booster shots available, I think, in September. And again, it's because of this combination of waning immunity and the fact that our immune response, the original vaccine does not protect as well against the Delta variant as it protects against the other variants that were out there. So my response to all this is vaccinate, 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 and then public health measures, wear a mask, social distance. I'm going to skip actually most of this. I'm going to do this. So this is, so let me go back to here. We know that when an infected person talks or coughs or sneezes, they release particles that contain the virus. And if they're infected with the Delta variant, each particle contains a whole lot more virus than anything we've seen before. This is looking at the particles released from somebody saying stay healthy without a mask or with a mask. And so each bright dot is a particle that was released. This is actually not a particle, this is the control, showing that things are working the way they think it works. And, masks really cut down on the amount of virus that's released into the environment. And with the Delta variant, that's critically important right now. And so with that, let's open it up to questions, discussion, comments, all of the above.
I think, Scott, you have some questions. And then one of the other questions that came in, Dr. Jake and Dr. Bob, is Delta likely to mutate again?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
It's almost certain.
yeah.
They all well, Jake, you should be talking about this, but this is what viruses do. They make so many mistakes when they replicate that they shoot off in a whole bunch of different directions in terms of their genetic material. And most of those don't help them at all.
Right.
But every now and then they'll get one that gives it a survival advantage over what it was before. And then that virus will become the dominant one, just like we saw with Delta.
Don't go back and listen to my old town halls. In one of my old town halls, somebody asked me, you think we'll need boosters like we do for influenza? And I said, well, coronaviruses don't mutate nearly as rapidly as flu viruses. So no, I'm pretty sure we won't need boosters. Don't listen to that crap. I downplayed what I thought was not going to happen, and it has happened. And it has happened big time. And it's happened, in my opinion, Delta variant was first seen in India, where you had hundreds of millions of people being infected with the coronavirus. And even with a relatively low mutation rate like coronaviruses have, when you have hundreds of millions of people getting infected, you're going to make lots of mutants. And like Bob said, most of the mutants are not going to help the virus, but eventually you're going to get a Delta variant, which, because it helps the virus, takes over like crazy.
So when we were talking risk benefit earlier, we were talking from an individual perspective.
Right.
Your individual risk is way more from the disease, especially now that it's surging again, than is thousands of times worse from the disease in the situation we're in right now compared to the risk from the vaccine. Okay. From a population standpoint, it's an even bigger deal.
Yep.
If we could get enough people vaccinated, the virus would have fewer places to go and much, much less opportunity to mutate.
Right.
The slower we are at vaccinating the planet, the more mutations we're going to get. And this thing is not going away.
Yep.
This may be a permanent situation we're in, but until we wise up and get something closer to herd immunity, we're just baiting it to mutate, and it'll keep happening.
And the more it mutates, the more people we have to vaccinate to get close to herd immunity.
Right. Yeah, we could have had this in the rearview mirror by now, and we blew it.
We could have had herd immunity by now. When we were at an R naught of 3, we had to have like 60 or 65% people immune to get herd immunity. If we're right that the new variant has an R naught of around 6, we've got to get closer to 85 to 90% people immune in order to approach herd immunity.
It's something people should understand about R naught too. That's an average population base that he's citing. If you put people in different settings, like if you live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, the R naught's going to be really small. If you put a lot of people in a crowded setting, like a school, and you don't use what you have available to you to cut down transmission, the R naught in those settings are going to be higher than that 6 that he's cited. So I've seen stuff already with R naughts calculated up to 9.5 of the Delta variant, but at population base, you're probably, just ballpark, it's probably about 6, like that.
And 6, as far as I'm concerned, is bad enough.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, it really is. Other questions?
So we're living in an era in which people are already cautious or paranoid of these, the existing vaccinations. Now we have the spiking of Delta. And, you know, I've heard people say, well, it's not going to help me now to get the vaccination because it's a new ball game. What do you say to those people?
Even with Jake's pessimistic sort of
Yes.
color drawing that he's showing you right here, that when you look at equally exposed populations like in outbreak settings, you're gonna have about, it looks like about a 3-fold lower infection rate among people who are fully vaccinated so far. That's not,
okay.
You know, there'll still be some waning over time. That'll get worse over time if we didn't boost. But it's 3-fold at least less infectivity or less infection rate, and at least a 10-fold protection factor for getting sick enough to wind up in the hospital or die.
And again, that's because
Okay.
once you get infected, you get such a rapid immune response
Right.
that can help prevent it from going into serious illness.
Right. So I do not understand, in the face of something this common, when we've seen it throw our entire society into convulsion, why would people want to take a 10-fold greater risk of dying? And why would people want to send their kids to school without the protection that we can afford them of at least just a mask? And if you do both, I saw a question pop up in chat about, well, what's the end game here? How do we ever get this under control? If you did both masking in public and vaccination to a much higher rate, the protection factor multiplies, right?
Yep.
If you've got, 70% protection against infection from the vaccine and 80% protection from the masks, those multiply so that you get a small enough risk that you can go about your business and do what you want to do. Until we hit herd immunity, there's just no other way we're going to keep the economy open, schools open, hospitals open, unless we do both.
And again, what Bob said earlier, the R naught is a community-wide number. If we just start wearing masks, the R naught goes down dramatically, because masks will filter out many of the particles that are being released from people's from talking or sneezing or coughing. And so I completely agree. The combination of vaccines, masks, social distancing, I think we could get this under control. I don't know how long we have to be able to say that that's going to be the case.
So
just out of curiosity, is there a vaccination being created just for Delta?
Yeah, I know the Moderna. I mean, one of the beauties of both Moderna and Pfizer is it's relatively easy to go from one sequence to the next. It's just a matter of letters that you put into the computer, quite frankly. And so it's relatively easy to get a new vaccine, but again, to then get it and put it into testing, get it approved for emergency use authorization, and then finally approved is going to take some time.
So we've got a long question in the chat that is really good, which, horribly paraphrasing here, says, so what do we do? You know, how do we get more people to take the vaccine when it seems like they are so entrenched? And I agree with you. I've never, you know, I've done public health my whole career, and I've never felt as much despair as I do right now, because we had the tools, and for some reason, opposition to the really simple tools of masks and vaccine has taken on an us versus them component. And I see it from our side too. I mean, I've never, people are getting noticeably angrier and angrier about it. I don't know where we go, except I would offer that the only reason you don't see polio anymore,
Right.
or likely see measles or any of the other vaccine preventable diseases that used to be really common, it's not because we convinced everybody that vaccines were good. It's because of requirements.
Yep.
Right.
We required it for school attendance. And that's what took all those childhood vaccines and got us to the point of hitting herd immunity. Without that, we would never have gotten there. Witness flu. We could hit herd immunity with flu. We just choose not to, because so many people choose not to get vaccinated. The only way you get even healthcare workers on board with vaccine enough to get them over a herd immunity threshold in their institutions is to require it for having a job. So I hate to say it, I don't think there's a way out of this without some kind of requirement. And we are so 180 degrees the opposite in much of this country,
Right.
that I do not see a light at the end of the tunnel, to be honest.
So Bob, do you think that might change at least a little bit once we go from emergency use authorization to a fully licensed product?
There is a fraction of folks who say that they are waiting for the FDA to fully license it. And you got to understand, we've given more doses of this vaccine, and we have more data available than anything I can think of, medicine or vaccine, that the FDA has ever licensed. We have more data on this than anything. The FDA, this is where I'm gonna speculate somewhat here, because the reason they haven't yet may be just a time factor. They just want to say, well, we want to make sure that nothing happens to people a year out, even though there's not even a theoretical basis for that.
Yeah.
And often with vaccines, FDA wants to see waning data for when, if or when a booster may be necessary. So they may not want to license it until they can say, yep, you're going to have to get a booster every 8 months or a year. And that takes a lot of time to just wait and see what happens. In the meantime, there are tons of anecdotal stories. The risk, there are a lot of people dying right now because they didn't get a vaccine because they were waiting. And they waited too damn long. And I hear lots of anecdotal stories from people who work in hospitals saying people are there about to get put on a ventilator and ask then if they can get the vaccine.
Right.
When it is obviously too damn late to help. It's a preventive tool.
Megan, we have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to ask, so if they do need to modify the vaccine for the Delta variant, for example, then does the FDA authorization, does that start all the way over and backtrack again?
I don't know the answer to that. My guess is they will need a new emergency use authorization, but I don't know the answer to that. Bob, do you know?
Yeah, I think they would. Now the exception to that is flu, because in a sense, every year flu vaccine
Right.
changes the
Right.
the exact antigen that is used.
Yeah.
So they can make an argument that
there's-
all we're changing is the mRNA that's coding for a slightly different spike protein.
Mhm.
And therefore there shouldn't be, any delay. But I'll tell you, the FDA is a really cautious agency. They have been for a very long time, and I'm pretty sure they'll insist on seeing the data. It won't be quite as slow as the original, as fast as that was, because now we've gotten through phase 1, phase 2, basically. So they can go straight to some pretty large trials, I
Right.
think. But it'll still be several months, I'm afraid.
So Maureen asked the question, how do we get the message out for vaccination? Both Bob and I and anybody else who's involved in this will talk until we're blue in the face to anybody we can. But that may come down more to people who have been involved in public relations.
Right.
To really, I think we need to get the people who know how to change people's minds to get them to buy candy X versus candy Y, to give us some ideas on how we get people to change their minds. And I'm like Bob, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get a lot of people to change their minds, because I think we are so entrenched in our silos that it's going to be difficult to get people to change their minds.
And a lot of we talk a lot about vaccine hesitant versus vaccine opposition, right? And we've long been, for years, been optimistic about, the vast majority of folks are just hesitant. If we just give them the right information enough, we can wear that down. And we honestly, a lot of us in public health thought all along that if we had one good outbreak, it would fix a lot of vaccine hesitancy, because people would see how bad the old diseases were. And holy cow, because of some kind of what team you're on sort of mentality that has arisen as a result of this pandemic or alongside this pandemic, I don't think there's as much movement that we can make in that middle ground. We just had the worst epidemic we've had in our lifetimes, and it hasn't moved people. Epidemic we've had in our lifetimes. I think HIV can give me a run there. But
not
from
in terms of
societal
number of
disruption,
people infected.
yeah, from
Certainly in terms
societal
of severity, yeah.
Right, societal disruption. There's nothing like
Not
Right.
since 1918.
Yeah. Last time.
Maureen, this Scott, I've been part of some messaging conferences recently on this because of my work with Valleywise and Heal, and it really is a public relations issue, because damning people or making them feel lesser or whatever is no way to get across a message. And people will only listen to people they respect or they think are on the same page. And so in some arenas, there's a big effort to find individuals who are respected in lots of different segments, and to try to get, the problem is elected officials.
Yeah.
You know, they have gotten so entrenched. You know, the governor of Texas now proves he has COVID-19. Do we think that's going to change his attitude towards, what he's doing in Texas? Probably not. And so what will it take? People will only listen to people they know or respect. And it has to come from the media that is contradictory. Getting individuals there to be able to come forward and saying, kids, we're wrong. This is, we are putting at risk everybody by not getting this. But what hope is there in this country right now to achieve that? It's very tough. I would suggest public health call Mar-a-Lago a problem and get rid of it.
I do have another question.
Sure, Mo.
Thank you for that. You just kind of confirmed, Scott, what I believe anyway, what seems kind of obvious, but okay, my my daughter's 42-year-old friend died of COVID a week and a half ago.
Oh, sorry.
He was previously healthy. He was not vaccinated. Apparently, East Valley, whatever you call it. I don't want to put a label on it because it's just, I can't fathom it. But my question is, was his death because he had no pre-existing conditions or anything due to a result of the viral load that he had inhaled, or what makes it such that some people do die? They can't respond. They can't absorb the oxygen. What made that happen to this previously healthy young man, father of 2 kids, that doesn't make it happen to other people?
And again, we know about some pre-existing conditions. And again, the argument that I'm making, and it's an argument, I can't tell you what happened with this person, but what we know in experimental animals is the higher dose of a virus you give them, the sicker the animals get. That's clear, no question about that. And when I started looking up the data for the Delta variant, it became obvious to me that probably the average person is now getting infected with more virus than they were infected with before. And so they are more likely to get severe disease. Now, again, this is me talking as a virologist. I don't think there's any real good clinical data for that out there. But if you're going to ask me from my experience of working with viruses, that's what I would say.
So the exposure is what ultimately could lead to demise.
Yep. And so what we've where we do know this is the case is that I believe it's in healthcare workers who obviously often are getting exposed to higher amounts of virus. They often get more serious disease without pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
So again, that correlates with the idea that the more virus you're exposed to, the more likely you have of getting a really severe disease. And again, from what we know about Delta is that people are getting exposed to more virus than they were ever exposed to with any of the other variants.
And I have to add that we'll probably never know for sure.
Yeah.
Because with all sorts of diseases, there's a spectrum of severity.
Yep.
And it's not really clear often. What you got to keep in mind, and one of the horrible things I think that happened with this is right off the bat, there's been lots of information about COVID out there, which is a good thing. But right off the bat, when we started talking about who's at higher risk, people lost their perspective of that means higher. That doesn't mean that other people have no risk.
Right.
So there's a lower fatality rate in young, healthy people compared to older adults. Sure, but there's a fatality rate. And it's a lot worse than a lot of other infections fatality rate. This thing has been just between the infectiousness and the at least slightly more severe than some things, it's a little more severe than the flu, you know. Flu kills young, healthy people all the time. Always has.
Right.
So.
Well,
I saw Megan had a hand up.
yes.
Yep.
Megan?
You're on mute, Megan.
Oh, maybe that was her before. Well, one thing, we'll wait here for a second for Megan, that I wanted to ask Dr. Bob, Dr. Jake, is the people that aren't vaccinated who have previously had COVID and their risk
Yeah, good question.
for reinfection.
So the reason they recommend vaccine for people who previously had COVID, you know, a lot of the times we think, oh, natural immunity will surpass anything that we can cook up. It turns out not. You get a better response, at least by some measures. Jake, you can correct me on this.
No, that's
At
right.
at least some of the measures, you get a better response from the vaccine alone than you do from the disease.
Yep.
And if you've got them both, you get even higher than that. So, yeah, if you're lucky enough to have been through COVID and gotten through it, still get your vaccine, because it just, there are people who've already gotten COVID twice, which is kind of phenomenal. I'm used to coronaviruses, people getting them 1 year and then the next year, but a few months apart is quite something.
Yeah,
So would you-
and coronaviruses are really known to not give super long-lasting immunity. And so that again is why really what the recommendation is, even if you've been infected, get the vaccine. That'll give you a super high immune response and really give strong protection.
So we don't want to end this on a sober down note. What has come to my mind over the last while is that reach out to the people you know and give them a call. You probably haven't seen them in a long time, and ask in a friendly up way, have you been vaccinated? I just want to make sure all my friends are safe. And there's got to be a way that at the individual level that we reach out to people, and because I know people who have not been vaccinated, and I have called on them and said, what are you doing? And we've talked it through. Most of them have gotten vaccinated. And so it really is almost to an individual basis. And I know we can't probably get to herd immunity that way, but at least we could maybe save some lives. For whatever reasons, people are not getting vaccinated is totally political and not public health. That we live in an era that dismisses science, that has relegated it to a political side alleyway, you know, is part of the tragedy of these times. And we have to help get people understanding scientists know what they're doing, and we have to learn to trust it. Not that scientists don't make mistakes, but anyway, it really, I ask people all the time, you know, if I'm in line, it's annoying, but I ask them, I say, so have you been vaccinated? You know, here we are at Costco. And oftentimes people will appreciate that you've taken that time to ask them, but check in with your friends or people you know and just encourage people. So, Dr. Bob, Dr. Jake, we so admire you and thank you for this conversation. We're going to continue it. We'll do this again in a month or so. But all of you, let us know what you're hearing and if you see successful campaigns or anything out there that's important, let us know what works. These are tough times. Yes, Bob.
About talking to people individually, especially if you've got a healthcare background or you're really interested in this. The Arizona Partnership on Immunization has a speakers, volunteer speakers group that they've been sending around to workplaces that want it. And I've been doing a little of that. That's an opportunity too. So
that's great. And what's that called?
TAPI. Do you know TAPI at all? The Arizona
yes.
on Immunization. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you get my name on there, maybe, Bob, as a speaker?
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yep.
Well, no longer are links just sausage. It's much more important now. So thank you all for being part of this. These are very, very serious and incredible times. Please help us all reach people to get vaccinated. So with that, happy summer. I hope people got out of town while it was safe. Hopefully we will all continue. Thank you, Megan, and be careful in Los Angeles. Be careful in South Dakota. Be careful every place. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Bye.